Hi, I'm Certified Personal Property Appraiser Dave Maloney, author of Appraising Personal Property Principles and Methodology. This video is another in a series of hot topic discussions for the personal property appraiser. To see all my videos, visit my YouTube channel at youtube.com/asktheappraiser. Note that throughout these hot topic discussions, I make reference to UsePAP. UsePAP is an acronym for the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice and is promulgated by the Appraisal Foundation of Washington, D.C. The goal of UsePAP, which is updated biannually, is to maintain public trust in the appraisal profession. For more information about UsePAP, visit appraisalfoundation.org. In this hot topic discussion, I address how, during the appraisal process, the personal property appraiser might make use of print photographs or digital images, as well as other client or third-party provided information, as a substitute for conducting a hands-on personal inspection of the subject property. For this discussion, I'll use the terms photographs, digital images, and images interchangeably. I'll also refer to clients and other third parties who provide the appraiser with information used to help the appraiser identify the subject property simply as other parties. Before we proceed, let's establish the definitions of four important terms I'll be using throughout this discussion. A contingent appraisal is one in which the validity of an appraiser's conclusion, opinion, or analyses is dependent on the accuracy of information provided to the appraiser by the client or other sources, such as repair firms, claims adjusters, other appraisers, subject matter experts, colleagues, authenticators, grading services, testing facilities, etc. An example would be an assignment in which a fine art appraiser inspects a painting and then retains the services of an expert to authenticate the painting. The accuracy of the appraiser's conclusions will be dependent on the validity of the authenticator's findings. Depending on the contingency appraisal assignment conditions, the appraiser may or may not personally inspect the subject property when doing a contingent appraisal. A traditional appraisal, on the other hand, is one in which the appraiser personally inspects the subject property. The traditional appraisal always involves a personal inspection by the appraiser, but the assignment might or might not be contingent on information provided by others. In other words, the traditional appraiser could either develop an opinion of value without the assistance of others, as is most often the case, or the appraiser, if need be, could retain the services of others to assist in developing the appraiser's opinions, conclusions, or analyses. A distance appraisal is one in which the appraiser does not personally inspect the subject property. By definition, then, a distance appraisal is a contingent appraisal, since the validity of the assignment results will be contingent on the accuracy of information provided to the appraiser by others. An online appraisal is a special type of distance appraisal in which, again, the appraiser does not personally inspect the property, but with online appraisals, information is provided to the appraiser via the Internet, and subsequently the appraiser delivers the assignment report results to the client via the Internet. Let's begin. We'll divide this hot topic discussion into several sections. First, we'll delve into the underlying UsePAP requirements, including the competency rule, that govern contingent and distance appraisal assignments, in which the appraiser makes use of photographs and other information provided by others in order to develop an opinion of value, and in which the appraiser may or may not personally inspect the subject property. We'll also note the importance of dividing property into two categories: property that is still available for inspection, and property that, for whatever reason, is no longer available for inspection. By the way, when the property is no longer available for inspection, the appraiser obviously has no option other than to forego a personal inspection of the property and instead to make use of information, including photographs, provided by others. We'll then review how appraisers have historically made use of photographs and other information provided by others, along with the benefits of doing so. Then we'll discuss the types of extant property which do not qualify for being appraised at distance without the benefit of a personal inspection by the appraiser. We'll also discuss the intended uses which lend themselves to such distance appraisals. And lastly, we'll discuss the limiting conditions and associated extraordinary assumptions that are inherent in distance appraisal assignments, in which, in lieu of a personal inspection, the appraiser makes use of photographs and other information provided by others. Let's review the UsePAP requirements that have a direct impact on contingent and distance appraisal assignments. Of course, any of the relevant parts of UsePAP would apply, such as the preamble, definitions, all the rules, standards 7 and 8, etc., but certain parts of UsePAP are particularly relevant to assignments in which no personal inspection is made by the appraiser, such as UsePAP's competency requirements, the need to identify the property and its value-relevant characteristics, and the requirements that the scope of work actually performed in the assignment yields assignment results that are understandable and that are credible in the context of the intended use of the report. Regarding competency, for purposes of this discussion, I will assume that the appraiser complies with UsePAP's competency rule, which requires the appraiser to be competent to perform the assignment. Or, if not competent, the rule requires that the appraiser disclose the lack of knowledge and/or experience to the client, that the appraiser take all steps necessary to complete the assignment competently, and that the appraiser disclose in the report the lack of knowledge or experience and the steps that were taken to complete the assignment competently. Often, the latter includes additional study or research, or collaborating with other appraisers, or retaining the services of a subject matter expert. Alternatively, the appraiser can decline or withdraw from the assignment. This is only a brief overview of the competency rule. All appraisers should be familiar with the competency rule as it sets forth requirements that are at the very heart of all appraisal assignments. Regarding property identification, it might come as a surprise to many, but UsePAP does not require that the appraiser personally inspect the subject property. Instead, UsePAP's Standard 7 requires that the appraiser identify the property as well as the characteristics of the property that are relevant to the type and definition of value and intended use of the appraisal. Note the focus on identifying value-relevant characteristics and not on personally inspecting the property. The degree or extent of inspection required in order to identify the item and its value-relevant characteristics will vary depending on assignment conditions, such as whether or not the property is still available for inspection, and on the intended use of the report. For example, the inspection might be extensive for an IRS self-contained report, but be relatively modest for a restricted use report meant only for the client's personal use. In addition, the degree of inspection could range from the appraiser making personal observations during a traditional hands-on inspection to the appraiser relying completely on information, including photographs, provided by others, including from the client or perhaps from a third party. That is a contingent distance appraisal. Contingent appraisals, whether traditional or at distance, always involve extraordinary assumptions, particularly the assumption that the information being provided to the appraiser by others is accurate. And with distance appraisals, not being able to inspect the property is a limiting condition. We'll discuss limiting conditions and extraordinary assumptions later. Regardless of how or by whom the property is inspected, or how the appraiser obtains his or her information, the degree or extent of inspection by whomever and the amount of information transmitted to the appraiser must be sufficient to enable the appraiser to identify the property itself as well as the property's value-relevant characteristics. These value-relevant characteristics fall into three categories: quality characteristics and value-relevant economic and physical attributes. Quality characteristics that the appraiser is required to identify must be sufficient to establish the relative quality of the item. This is a good, better, best type of gauge and includes such property characteristics as material, condition, damage, alterations, restorations, repairs, conservation, additions, obsolescence, missing parts, physical deterioration, etc. All else being equal, the better its quality, the higher the property's value. The appraiser must also identify economic attributes and physical attributes that are relevant to value. Economic attributes are extrinsic to the property. Examples include: is the property plentiful, scarce? Has a catastrophic natural disaster impacted the market? Is it in or out of style? Is it made from out-of-favor animal fur or parts of illegal contraband material such as banned ivory? Is it a passing fad or a collecting trend with longevity? Is it depreciable, common, and of little interest? Or is it appreciable, rare, and in great demand? Physical attributes are intrinsic to the property. Examples include: is the maker well known? For example, was a work of art made by a known and listed artist? Does the item have desirable features? For example, a highly carved back, knees, and feet are physical, value-relevant attributes of a period Chippendale chair, but porcelain casters added to the chair in Victorian times would not be a value-relevant attribute. Is the item genuine or is it a reproduction? Is the item's importance enhanced by significant provenance? Does regionalism come into play? Often property attributed to a local maker is more valuable within the maker's locale than at distance. So, as we have seen, UsePAP requires the appraiser to be competent to perform the assignment or to acquire the necessary competency. That failing, the appraiser must decline or withdraw from the assignment. UsePAP also requires the appraiser to identify the property and its value-relevant characteristics, but UsePAP does not require that the appraiser personally inspect the property. Indeed, UsePAP states, an appraiser can use any combination of a property inspection and documents or other resources to identify the relevant characteristics of the subject property. When considering whether or not to make use of photographs and information provided by others in lieu of a personal inspection, of primary concern governing how the appraiser should proceed is whether or not the subject property is still available for inspection. If the item is no longer accessible, such as property stolen or lost in a fire or natural disaster, an inspection is impossible, and the appraiser has no option other than to rely on information provided by others. In such assignments, the appraiser uses any information the client, often the claimant or insured, can provide, including photographs, verbal and written descriptions, sketches, similar examples in a catalog or online, etc., to assist in determining such issues as the property's identity, value-relevant characteristics, pre-damage condition, and, of course, value. On the other hand, with property that is still available for inspection, there are two options available to the appraiser: to either personally inspect the property as is traditionally done, or if unable to do so for whatever reason, the appraiser can make use of photographs and information provided by others who did inspect the property. In the late 1990s, many of us who espoused the new appraising paradigm being brought about by use of the evolving technology of digital photography and online internet appraisals were challenged by a few traditional appraisers who were fearful that online distance appraisals would have a catastrophic effect on their traditional appraisal businesses and would usher in an age of faulty appraisals based on tampered or bogus digital images, on unverifiable client-provided property descriptions, and on errors caused by the appraiser not personally inspecting the subject property. I am pleased to say that these initial fears have proven to be unfounded. Those who objected to the use of photographs and other information provided by others in lieu of a personal inspection might have been unaware that UsePAP permits identifying the property and its value-relevant characteristics in ways other than by personal observations. And traditional appraisers have long used photographs, specifically in developing opinions of value at distance for items no longer available for inspection, such as items stolen or lost in a fire or natural disaster. So, the use of photographs in lieu of personal inspections is permitted, is nothing new, and as I mentioned earlier, is at times even required in order for the assignment to be completed competently. For qualifying property types and for qualifying intended uses, contingent distance appraisals not requiring a personal inspection by the appraiser, and which are often offered online, frequently provide benefits for both the client and the appraiser. Benefits to the client include timely and convenient appraisals, regardless of locale, normally for a fraction of the cost of using a traditional appraiser who insists on performing a personal inspection. Benefits for the appraiser include low overhead and access to a client base that extends well beyond the appraiser's locale. By the way, here are some sidebar issues regarding the use of photographs. The use of photographs is necessary if the subject property is located a long distance from the appraiser, is too fragile or too expensive to ship, or is potentially too valuable to risk shipping to a specialist appraiser for his or her personal inspection. Conversely, perhaps the appraiser traveling to the property is cost prohibitive or unreasonable, given the relatively low potential value of the subject property. Specialist appraisers and authenticators who are recognized as having extensive knowledge and experience in a specialty area can be valuable consultants to the appraiser, but they too often live far from the subject property. Some appraisers and authenticators will work from high-quality photographs, while others will insist on a physical examination of the property at some point in time before reaching a conclusion. Also, the use of photographs during the problem identification phase of the appraisal process may even eliminate the need for a full-blown appraisal, if, from the photographs, the appraiser can immediately determine that the object is a fake or for some other reason, such as because of its minimal value, is simply not worth pursuing. However, on occasion even high-quality photographs will prove inconclusive, necessitating a personal inspection of the property by the appraiser, assuming, of course, that the property is still available for inspection. Despite the benefits of contingent distance appraisals, appraisers must recognize the drawbacks of not personally inspecting the property and relying instead solely on information provided by others. This is a moot point for property no longer available for inspection, in which case the appraiser has no other option. But when performing a contingent appraisal without a personal inspection, often over the Internet, for property which has not been lost or stolen and is still available for inspection, the appraiser must ensure that he or she is able to perform the distance appraisal assignment competently, that the property is a qualifying type which lends itself to being appraised without a personal inspection and is for a qualifying intended use, that the report contains sufficient information to be understandable, and that the results of the distance appraisal are credible in the context of intended use. In other words, while distance appraisals might work for many types of extant property, they are not suitable for all types of property. And while they might work for some intended uses, they are not suitable for all intended uses. Which property types qualify? While virtually any type of personal property can be appraised by the traditional appraiser, who is competent and who has the ability to personally inspect the item, many but not all items qualify for being appraised at a distance without the benefit of a personal inspection by the appraiser. Some types of property, such as those listed below, do not qualify and simply should not be appraised without a personal inspection unless the subject property is no longer available for inspection, such as might be the case if the property had been stolen, in which case extraordinary assumptions will have to be made. But assuming that the property still exists and is available for inspection, clients having such non-qualifying items seeking a distance appraisal should instead be referred to a competent traditional appraiser who can personally examine the property. Examples of property that, if still existing, should not be appraised at distance, including online, include items requiring testing or certification to prove identity or authenticity. Examples include diamonds or colored gemstones that require testing, or paintings that need testing in order to be authenticated. Items in which questions as to condition, identity, or age exist that cannot be resolved to the appraiser's satisfaction, even with the use of extraordinary assumptions, also should not be appraised without a personal inspection. And finally, items which are potentially so valuable as to warrant in the appraiser's judgment a physical inspection by a qualified appraiser. To do otherwise for very valuable items might cause a perceived loss of credibility in the appraiser's value conclusions, despite the accuracy of those value conclusions. As noted, an exception to the above would be for appraisals done for items which have been lost, destroyed, or stolen and are no longer available for inspection, in which case the limiting conditions and resulting extraordinary assumptions faced by the distance appraiser would be no different than those faced by the traditional appraiser who would normally perform a personal inspection. Accordingly, items no longer available for inspection can be appraised equally as well by either the distance appraiser or the traditional appraiser. Which intended uses qualify for distance appraisals? If the property is no longer available for inspection, appraisers can perform contingent distance appraisals for any appraisal assignment regardless of its intended use. Typical examples would include litigation, casualty loss insurance claims, or transit-related claims. But for property that is still available for inspection, there are limitations as to intended use. Intended use should be limited to those uses for which the only intended user is the client him or herself. For such assignments, UsePAP's restricted use report option can be used since there are no other intended users other than the client. Here are some examples of acceptable intended uses for contingent distance appraisals. Nowadays, these types of assignments are often performed online via the Internet. An acceptable intended use would be for clients wishing to obtain appraisals in order to have confidence when buying or selling property, that is, a sales advisory appraisal. Another acceptable use would be for owners wishing to equitably divide property among heirs, or who are curious and just want to know. But lately, online distance appraisals have become more acceptable for certain intended uses involving intended users other than the client, such as casualty insurance loss and transit-related damage claims purposes. Such assignments often make use of UsePAP's summary report option. Note, however, that before using distance online appraisals for intended uses having intended users other than the client, all parties must be aware of the limitations of a distance appraisal and still agree to its use. Distance appraisal assignments include those in which the appraiser is unable to personally inspect the subject property. By definition, distance appraisals, including those done online, have limiting conditions. The inability to personally inspect the subject property is of itself a limiting condition that must be disclosed in the appraisal report, as well as, by the way, in the report's UsePAP certification statement. The limiting condition of being unable to inspect the property, in turn, gives rise to extraordinary assumptions, which themselves must be disclosed in the report, though not in the certification. Extraordinary assumptions might be required to address any number of issues, such as assumed existence of the property, identity of the property and its value-relevant characteristics, ownership of the property, the property's condition, authenticity and age, the materials from which it is made, the quantity of items, the property's quality or grade, etc. As noted, UsePAP requires that all limiting conditions and extraordinary assumptions be clearly, accurately, and conspicuously disclosed in the appraisal report. And Standard 8 requires that the report's UsePAP certification state whether or not the appraiser personally inspected the subject property. In summary, though the appraiser most often does, there is no requirement that the appraiser personally inspect the subject property. What is required, however, is that the appraiser be competent to perform the assignment, that the appraiser identify the property and its value-relevant characteristics, and that the appraiser clearly discloses the limiting conditions and extraordinary assumptions encountered. Historically, the appraiser has long made use of contingent distance appraisals, the validity of which is dependent on information provided by others. The advent of online appraisals has ushered in a paradigm shift. Personal inspections by the appraiser can at times be eliminated from the appraisal process, while still ensuring that the report is understandable and is credible within the context of intended use. For items no longer available for inspection, there are no limitations. But for items still available for inspection, there are limitations as to the types of property that should be appraised sight unseen, and there are limitations as to the intended uses of appraisal reports for assignments in which the appraiser did not personally inspect the subject property. This concludes this hot topic discussion. For several hundred pages crammed with how-tos for the personal property appraiser, get a copy of my book, Appraising Personal Property, Principles and Methodology, at appraisalcourseassociates.com.